Chapter 27. Grounded. Those eyes stared down at him. Even impaired by the sable claws raking across every surface of the room, the moonlight streaming through the window highlighted the lead whites. They cut through the darkness with remarkable success, and Hiccup could only meet them head-on in a one-sided staring contest. He knew those eyes never ceased watching him. Watching the sweat cool on the hollow of his neck, watching his breath mellow in soft pants after he jerked from a most detailed dream. To think he used to love the painted ceiling. Now it creeped him out. Hiccup tried not to move as he stretched his senses as far as they would go in the middle of the night, attempting to locate Toothless. No breathing could be heard. No heat of a near body could be felt. Hiccup risked scanning the room. No dragon. He wasn't surprised by now. Toothless had taken to leaving in the middle of the night more and more often, staying only long enough for Hiccup to fall asleep. The young man couldn't blame him. Groaning, Hiccup wiped a hand over his face, noting the clamminess of his skin that could not subside the warmth in his cheeks. He used to have this problem back on Berg, where he woke in various hues of morning light, sheets a mess and head muddled with the remnants of dreams. Dreams that usually centered on Astrid, the only female that grabbed his attention in that day. He didn't mind these dreams back then. He had a loft and privacy and believed it to be the closest he would ever get to the girl. Astrid's involvement in his bitter parting with Berg helped suppress these dreams. Survival and exploration helped him push these moments to the very recess of his mind. Then Doris kissed him like she had, sparking a reaction he was wholly unprepared for. He didn't have the distractions of flying or finding food or avoiding humans and dragons and monsters. He had a bed, a disobedient body, and an overactive imagination. Now Doris plagued his dreams as well as Astrid. That girl twin, Roughnut, made an appearance a couple of times. Doris's friend, whose name he had forgotten but whose eyes he'd never forget, tagged along in one, using the shawl she wore on her head to do things Hiccup was sure shawls weren't meant to be used for. That woman who smiled at him from across the smithy popped in just the other day. Hiccup released a soft growl, and he turned to smother his face in the pillow. What was wrong with him? Why was this happening now? Why was it persisting? He didn't know if this was normal. He never had any human guy friends aside from fish legs, but that friendship faded before they reached the age for this sort of thing. His father never talked to him about it. Gobber tried a couple times, but those moments were more awkward than Hiccup could handle. He had only seen Doris a couple of times since that festival, and always at a distance. He'd usually avert his eyes and shuffle away before he allowed himself a chance to try and discern any emotions from her face. He didn't want to know if he had been so horrible at the tongue-kissing that she now found him repulsive. He didn't want to know if she planned on kissing him again. He hadn't a clue on how to act. What's worse, he hadn't a clue on what he wanted. He'd never been so at odds with his own body before. Except for the whole scrawny when he didn't want to be scrawny issue. This was stupid. The only reason this happened to him now was because he suppressed it for so long, because he chose to live with a dragon over humans, because he chose isolation from his own species. He was being punished for his choices in some roundabout, sick manner. With the greatest effort, Hiccup pushed himself to a seated position, groaning all the while at the pressure of exhaustion pulling behind his eyes. He had to wash up, he had to smack some sense into himself, and he had to try to get some actual sleep. There were far more important things than desire, such as necessity.
You making mess?
I'm not.
Duh.
Not.
What you call this?
Metal scraps that I'm cleaning right now.
I cut out your eyes with metal scraps.
Yeah.
The dialogue floating from the smith's tent assaulted the ears of nearby stands and pedestrians on a nearly daily basis. One side stuck at a stilted bellow, the other dry and unimpressed. Passerbys always jumped and stared. Regulars went about their business, able to turn the interchange into background noise with practiced ease. Common though it may be, Toothless never tired of it. The dragon crouched low to the ground, hiding amidst the plethora of rugs hung in the neighboring stand, listening with perked ears to the bantering of each blacksmith. He peeked his head up over the table, acting as a wall between tents. Demian stood a good distance from Hiccup, so the boy was in no imminent danger. The Russ seemed to believe he had to raise his already raucous voice to make up for the space between them.
You do orders.
The blond giant howled, pointing at a line of damaged weapons stacked along a bench.
I'm doing them right now.
Hiccup lifted one end of the shield he had been re-bracing.
You do too much right now,
Demian called him out.
You clean now, you fix now, you lie.
Ugh.
Hiccup threw the shield down on his work table.
What do you want from me?
I want you burning in own dragon's fire.
Hiccup gave an exaggerated roll of his eyes so that Demian could understand his sentiments in simplest terms.
And to think you're not married,
Toothless heard his boy mutter.
I deliver this.
The blacksmith shook a chained spiked ball that Toothless couldn't imagine being on the end of.
When I come back, this clean.
Demian swept a massive hand in the general direction of Hiccup and all his projects before skulking out of the tent without bothering to wait for Hiccup to agree. Hiccup sneered at his back.
You left a mess everywhere else.
But you left a foreign mess. Hiccup didn't react when Toothless threw in his supplement. The dragon had to wonder if he were getting predictable or if Hiccup could sense him more easily. I brought you something. Hiccup looked up from shuffling around materials in time to see Toothless drop a few scales onto the ground from his mouth. Immediately, Hiccup's repair order was abandoned to drag the mostly finished tail fin from a tent corner and onto a working bench.
You got them already?
Hiccup asked, rather pointlessly, as he currently looked at them. The materials needed to weigh the prosthetic were collected and stowed away days ago on the chance that Hiccup's project didn't work out. It would be a quick fix, and they'd be up in the air in no time, but he really hoped it would work. It would be so cool. Yep, I was right, and starting early. Predictably, Hiccup's smile faltered, and Toothless rushed to continue before his human could fall into a bout of shame. It was just a few for now. More will be coming soon, and thank Ea, because they were feeling tight. Hiccup gently picked up the scales the Toothless bestowed upon him. They were cool and hard, harder than stone if that were possible, and somehow managed to emanate a tenor of death. They were no longer a part of Toothless. They didn't feed off his life force as the ones coating his body did now. They were more like rocks than scales now. Hiccup met Toothless's eyes. He still had trouble swallowing the thought of Toothless aging so quickly. Eventually, he would accept it. In a way, he already had, but he would never like it.
Are you sure you aren't just feeling confined from being grounded so long?
He carefully asked. He really worried for Toothless sometimes, more and more often as their stay lengthened. The dragon went through periods of ill humor that were once uncommon for the boastful creature. Through Hiccup's daily job and training, and now the uncomfortable nights, their time together had been cut into as well. Toothless flicked his ear, dismissing the thought. Whatever the reason, it doesn't matter. We'll be in the air again, where we belong, and out of here. The left corner of Hiccup's mouth pulled upwards as he nodded, but something empty filmed over his face.
I am sorry for this.
He spoke lowly.
I know it's not strictly necessary. We could have been in the air by now.
It's fine. Toothless cut him off. Focus on getting this thing finished. Hiccup placed the scales in the stoked fire within the hearth, resting them on the blistering rocks.
Scale melt, test 1. Oh, I should record this.
No, Toothless cried. No writing. Forge, make whatever your terms are. Just do it. Don't write. Hiccup laughed, this time more candid.
Okay.
It took all of Toothless's draconic pride not to wiggle his back end like an excited hatchling as the boy positioned himself in front of the shanked fan.
Here we go.
Hiccup threw his weight down on the bellows over and over again, breathing life and heat into the forge. The coals glowed with each inspiration, embers rose and rocks crackled. On and on this went, for far longer than Hiccup had ever had to heat anything. Usually the red glow of a workpiece would alert the young smith to a malleable ready piece, but the scales remained sleek and black, seemingly unaffected by the increasing warmth. Sweat beaded over the top of Hiccup's brow as the heat and exertion began to take its toll.
Damn,
he puffed, feeling the muscles in his back clinch with another push on the bellow.
You guys really are fireproof.
The natural climate of the city did nothing to help the blooming sauna. Wet and muggy, Berg's warmest spring couldn't compare to the humidity of Miklagard's late winter. Hiccup ached to take his shirt off. The cloth clung to his skin in confinement as sweat dampened his chest and pits, but doing so in a forge was about as foolishly unsafe as one could get. He had enough scars on his torso as is. He didn't know how long he was at it, only that he worked those bellows for longer than he ever had to in his life in the worst possible atmosphere. Eventually, Hiccup had to let up for fear of passing out. Panting, he stepped back from the hearth, giving his arms and back a short respite from the workout. He wouldn't have to train with Harold today if this kept up. The handful of scales set in the fire, content as could be, glittering a glossy black that mocked Hiccup for an effort wasted. Hiccup swore lightly, rubbing the moisture from his face. Before he could ask Toothless if it were even possible to melt scales, the dragon pounced on the bellow. The action was so sudden, so startling, that it took the strained groan of the handle's wood to propel Hiccup into motion.
Toothless, no!
Hiccup slammed into Toothless's side, knocking the dragon away from the hearth with surprising success. The Night Fury appeared just as shocked as Hiccup for but a heartbeat before shaking from his stupor. "Well, you weren't making it work." Toothless tried to hustle Hiccup away from the hearth, but Hiccup would not budge, instead putting all of his effort into shoving at the angular head.
"It's just going to take a while."
"It'll take forever if you do it."
"If you break this, Demian will freak out."
"He doesn't scare me."
"If we piss him off, we can't use the forge. We can't get this thing finished. Toothless!"
The dragon had retracted his teeth and bit down on the arm shouldering his snout, the gums clamping down on the appendage with enough force to bruise. Hiccup found himself dangerously close to using Toothless's pressure point against him. What had gotten into him? "You piss him off every day," Toothless contended. His lip curled as he released a long, low snarl around the arm.
"I'm a human. Let go."
"No, let me use the thingy."
"Yes and no. You don't even know what it's called."
Hiccup brought up one foot and began trying to free his arm by pushing against Toothless's cheek. Toothless winced at the contact, and the growl low in his throat rose in timbre at the human's temerity. It was this tangled scene that greeted Doris when she entered the tent. And for all of Toothless's superior senses, for all of Hiccup's observation skills, only her soft giggle alerted them to her presence. The dragon immediately released Hiccup's arm. Hiccup, who still pushed against Toothless's face with his foot, ended up kicking himself to the ground. He scrambled to his feet in the next instant, cursing in his head with every language he knew. Hiccup tried to find the words to explain the situation, not realizing it wouldn't matter since she couldn't very well understand him. His smell, his general lack of hygiene, the soot smudges on his face, all came to his awareness as he looked at Doris's simple but pristine attire. Doris laughed again with a gentleness about her that kept Hiccup from feeling too self-conscious. He got the impression she laughed more at his antics than at him.
Hi,
he settled on mumbling. He thought of the dream he had a couple nights ago, and the one before that, and the one before that, all with her in varying states of undress, in varying situations that involved varying activities. Hiccup averted his eyes to the unaffected scales, his heart pounding loud in his ears. Maybe it was good that he was so dirty and overheated. It would be harder for her to pinpoint his embarrassment. He heard her approach, every action of hers brought to hyper-awareness, and he returned his focus to her. Even Toothless had become part of the background, the dragon sat back on his haunches, watching the pair with interest. Guarded, Hiccup watched as Doris gave a small, unsure glance at Toothless, and then continued closing in on the boy while the dragon did nothing to impede her. Useless reptile. He felt close to panicking now, though his body would not move, legs locked and arms stiff at his side. She never came near him in the forge before. Was she going to kiss him again? Dear Freya, was she going to stick her tongue in his mouth with Toothless right there? He'd stop her this time, he was sure of it. There are some things he simply wouldn't subject Toothless to. She came to a halt after only just breaching his personal space. She could probably smell him and hear his uneven breathing and see the flush in his face. Hiccup stiffened as she reached a hand towards him, his eyes following the slender, subtle fingers that looked so out of place in the smithy and did nothing as they closed around his wrist. Once again, Hiccup allowed Doris to bring his hand to her person, and for one ridiculous moment he thought of how dirty her hand would be now. He hoped she didn't kiss his hand again, because that might actually make her sick considering how filthy they were. She didn't. She examined the scars again, her eyes lingering on those she felt partially responsible for, and then she shifted her dark eyes to meet his. "Bad," she spoke, entirely comprehensive with her limited Norse. Still holding onto his hand with her left one, she reached into a pouch in her hip, one Hiccup hadn't noticed before, and pulled out a pair of leather gloves with her right. She forced the protective mitts in the hand she held hostage, pushing his fingers to close a grip on them. "Good." She gave him a large smile that Hiccup couldn't even return because his face had gone completely slack at her actions. He could only watch, speechless, as Doris gave him and Toothless each an individual, parting nod. And then she left. Hiccup followed her with his eyes, his mouth still unhinged. It was only after the woman completely left his side that he moved his gaze onto the gift, running a thumb over the material. They were new gloves, thick, soft, and durable. He wriggled a hand inside one. It was a close fit, just enough wiggle room at the tip of each finger for growing. Hiccup could only blink at the gloved hand that twisted and clenched experimentally. He'd gotten used to working without them, as none ever seemed to fit him, and he didn't know the first thing about making anything decent. Saddles were one thing, but gloves? It took a certain amount of finesse to craft sturdy clothes meant for hard work. A surge of gratitude welled inside him. He didn't know if this was normal, not the gratitude, obviously, but Doris's behavior towards him and his reactions towards her. She noticed his burns and she did something about them. "I want you to rot with that woman." Hiccup fell out of his stupor.
What?
He yelped, subconsciously holding the other glove close to his chest. He stared, wide-eyed, at the dragon, wondering if he heard right. Toothless leveled a flat stare at the human. "I can't sleep there anymore." There being their bed. "I can't take this anymore." Hiccup continued to stare at the dragon for a moment longer, experiencing another loss for words. He couldn't rightly dispute this, because it was true. He felt guilty, shamefaced, confused. He didn't like this position, and he didn't like that he put Toothless in an awkward position either. He swallowed and took a moment to slip the other glove on. Another great fit.
"I don't know what to do,"
he muttered. And he didn't. He figured out how to stare down opposition and butt heads with aggression and physically defend himself to an extent. He figured out how to ride a dragon and negotiate with monsters and find a tentative alcohol tolerance. He could not, for the life of him, figure out his body. "Rot with her," Toothless repeated in a tone that suggested how obvious it was. Hiccup immediately opened his mouth to argue, and Toothless cut him off. "You are obviously in some sort of yen. I had not realized humans experienced those."
"I don't know what a yen is,"
Hiccup growled, running fingers through his hair. He paused at the strange feeling, looking at his hands to remember they were gloved. This was going to take some getting used to. He shook his head, taking a breath.
"I'm just an exploit to her. Something to brag about to her other co-workers or get her in some higher position."
Toothless didn't see what the problem was. "Well, it is just an activity to humans, is it not? I'm not sure if I understand this correctly, but humans seem to have physical needs for mating without the urge for offspring present. Which sounds completely unproductive."
"Yeah,"
Hiccup muttered, and he was unsure to which part he agreed to.
"But it's more than that. She's only interested because I'm your rider, and that imbecile Halfdan pretty much gave her permission to try."
Hiccup suspected this could be the biggest, perhaps the only turn-off when it came to Doris. He couldn't deny that she was attractive. Older than Gudrid, certainly, but that only enhanced every womanly aspect about her. His body wanted her, it made that much clear. His head started to turn on him as well, and now his pride was torn. Torn between becoming a man in this man's world and the degrading circumstances behind said activity. "For all of Apsu's wisdom, you are quite stupid. Why would she not just want to mate with you for being a strong male?" Hiccup scoffed.
Because I'm not a strong male?"
Toothless whipped his tail so fast Hiccup had no time to dodge. It collided with his head, knocking down some overhanging tools in the process. Hiccup yelped, his hands going to the throbbing area. "I don't let weak males ride my shoulders," Toothless snarled, baring his teeth at the boy. Hiccup stared at him, tenderly rubbing his head. He knew Toothless didn't like any self-deprecation on his behalf. even if this particular aspect sustained some truth to it, but usually he had more patience than this. "She brought you oblation," Toothless professed, "or what I suspect is oblation. No female has ever presented you with an offering while giving you these kinds of attentions." Hiccup gave his dragon the most annoyed glare he could muster, rather miffed by the violence directed at him.
"These are gloves,"
he intoned, even if the gesture behind them touched him. It proved Doris paid attention to his burns, anyway.
"Do I even want to know what oblation is?"
"It's part of our mating rites," Toothless explained, using a tone that suggested Hiccup should already know such a thing. "You first garner a female's attention by bringing her an oblation of skulls." Truthfully, Hiccup was a bit afraid to ask, but did so anyway.
"What kind of skulls?"
Toothless's ears perked up, all displeasure with his rider wiped from his posture. "Magnificent kills," he described. "The greatest of quarry. If she accepts, she challenges you to a fight. They can last moons." Hiccup's own irritation with the dragon slowly dimmed as Toothless squirmed and danced a bit in his place. He had not seen his friend this animated in a while, and deep down he knew it was because of how long the dragon had been grounded.
"So this is a fight that can last days?"
he asked. He wanted to keep Toothless on this high and listened with an open ear as he began slowly working the bellows again. The dragon nodded, growing more enthusiastic by the moment. "Oh yes, it's the greatest part. Males wait their entire lives for a female to engage in primary with them." Hiccup was sure he had understood wrong.
"Wait, they wait for the fighting part?"
Toothless wagged his tail. "Yes, the rotting comes after, and only if the male defeats the female. Most don't survive." Toothless threw this out as an insignificant detail. Even then, actual impregnation is a rare occurrence.
"Well, that explains why the world isn't overrun with dragons,"
Hiccup muttered. Toothless went on as though unhearing to the commentary. "But the primary is one of the most awaited moments in a male's lifetime. It only happens when we pass selection. Often females receive multiple oblation, and even then we need to be in a mating yen at the same time as our chosen seat." Toothless thumped his tail on the ground, much in the same way someone would smack their fist on a table saying, "Darn. I was so close to the primary. I had found the perfect female." It was then, as the dragon's reservation slipped, his rambling taking him too far back into dragon culture, when Hiccup's face, substrate with anticipation, had frozen with a lax jaw and focused attention, that was the moment when Toothless clammed up. Hiccup felt disappointment slam into him with the force of Mjolnir.
"So you found a female?"
He tried to maintain as much nonchalance as possible on the face of such keenness, but Toothless ignored the prompt. "My point is, I don't know much about human mating habits, but this female wants to rot you, and you clearly want to rot her. And I want you to rot her because your insanity is driving me insane." Hiccup allowed the change in subject, as always when it came to pushing Toothless for details of his past, and forced his mind onto the more necessary, albeit uncomfortable one.
I know.
Hiccup grabbed one of the tools knocked down earlier by Toothless's tail, a pair of tongs. He went to the forgotten scales on the fire and gave them a few experimental pokes. They seemed completely unresponsive to the heat, as solid and dead as their introduced condition. "You don't want to marry," Toothless stated, determined to do whatever it took to get Hiccup's full attention back on their departure.
"Yeah,"
Hiccup sighed. He placed the tongs on the anvil within arm's reach. No minuscule chalk of metal meeting metal tinged his bones. The gloves protected him from more than just heat. "You don't want one woman for your lifetime."
"Yeah."
It wasn't even an option anymore, really. "Do you see where I'm going with this?"
"I do. I swear I do."
Hiccup placed one hand on the bellows, but didn't start the process again, instead turning to face Toothless.
"But I just don't know what I'm doing. I hate not knowing what I'm doing."
"Then you jump in with both feet," the dragon said, sounding as if the answer was so blatant the conversation shouldn't even be taking place. "Isn't that what you humans say? Don't you do that anyway, when you don't know something?"
"Yeah, I mean, maybe, but this is women. Probably the one thing I'm ignorant and terrified of. I'm going to make a fool out of myself. I know I am, and there's no way I'm asking anyone for advice." Because of pride, and because he knew what sort of advice it would be. It's generally an uncomfortable situation." "Uncomfortable situations happen at night when you..." "All right, I get it,"
Hiccup balked. "Just promise me you'll think about it," Toothless finished with a plead. Hiccup bit his lip, holding the dragon's gaze for a moment, knowing that the dragon was genuine in his request. Halfdan and every other Viking probably thought they were helping Hiccup cover some sort of milestone. Sometimes he felt like their pet savage they were trying to humanize. Toothless just wanted his friend back. His shoulders sagged, and he released his lip from his capture.
"All right, yeah, I'll think about it."
"That's all I ask."
"So what do you say to finishing this tail fin?"
It was time for a brighter theme. "Do you need to ask?" Hiccup laughed, pushing down on the bellows. The fire flared with vivacity.
"Well, if molding doesn't work, I'll try the shingling idea. If worst comes to worst, I'll just reweigh it. I swear, I'll have us up in the air 3 days at the—"
A bear-like roar sounded from the other side of the tent, one that most likely echoed in the Sea of Marmara's very shores. The boys bore witness to Demian's ruddy cheeks darkening into an unflattering puce that brought out the gray hairs in his all-consuming hair. Demian did not move for a moment. Hiccup could see the rage collecting like the rising bubbles in an overboiled pot of water. Eventually it became too much, and words and spittle flew from the fat lips.
"This not clean, and you have dragon here."
"I was cleaning it right now,"
Hiccup insisted, before slipping from the side of his mouth.
"Toothless, you need to run."
"I don't think I should leave you here with him. He looks deranged."
"He usually looks like that. It'll be fine."
"I kill you,"
Demian promised, leaking credit from Hiccup's statement.
"I smash it with the anvil. I burn feet with fire."
"Calm down,"
Hiccup yelled, managing to match the giant's man's volume.
"If you kill me, you'll have to clean it."
"You should run too." Toothless tried to tuck Hiccup out by the apron. Hiccup swatted at the scaled head, keeping his eyes on Demian.
"I can't leave all our stuff here," he hissed. "I need this forge."
"I kill dragon,"
Demian continued to rave.
"Meine Schmiede, die Werkzeuge sind ruiniert."
Is he insulting me?
"Toothless, just leave."
I'm not in the mood to be insulted.
"So ein Vieh häutet man lieber und macht Suppe draus."
That was an insult, I could tell. Hiccup massaged his temples, trying to quell the pounding that had started up. He had a feeling he was going to drink tonight. He had to find some outlet for the stress of a grounded life. A night fury could transform into nothing but a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness, an ability that churned myths and horror stories among northern-dwelling humans for centuries. Toothless aligned his body along the very edge of a bathhouse roof, across the street from a tavern, melting into the night as only a shadow could. Invisible to the few humans outside at this hour, the dragon allowed a short while to revel in the cloak of solitude. In the moment where the moon commanded the sky and creatures of every niche altered their activity, the dragon could pretend he was back with his drove, back with his sky dancing and fire circles and moon howls. That was a lifetime ago. He knew this, he accepted it, but he cherished the memories as one would cherish childhood. Toothless rather liked the nights of Miklagard. The air cooled considerably, free from the sun's influence, but a warm current remained that curled around his back and tail like a caressing hand. The cats would flock to him like children, no longer distracted by human attentions, bearing gifts of fish and meats, and they would sing to him in a unit of purrs and chorus of yowls. The occasional human would voice a complaint, but one roar from Toothless usually sent them scurrying back inside. He would not have his tribute disturbed. Yes, Toothless enjoyed the nightlife more than any other time in the city, but he was more than ready to leave it. An ache for the skies plagued his heart, a yearning and a pull so powerful that he felt less and less in control of his actions. He grew jumpy, impatient, overly animated, and yet a weight, a sense of melancholy, depressed any positive feelings he might incur. Most frightening of all, with its lack of control, came the instincts to tear into human flesh. He had to make himself scarce in the daytime. He had to stick close by Hiccup, because Hiccup brought forth the humanity within that helped him keep his wits. It was a sickness that troubled him, the same that took the might of any dragon left flightless for too long, and the only cure lay far above the highest human structure. Only the thought of being so close to flying kept Toothless from fully giving in to his impulse to start killing. As long as he had his human, he could stave off this madness with time to spare. It was his love for Hiccup that had him agreeing to the boy's need to experiment. It was a good idea to camouflage and fireproof the tail fin. In the future it may even save them. But Toothless's need to attain altitude had him rushing the boy's intellect. Maybe Hiccup would have already figured out a way to form the scales if he hadn't interfered. Of course, the fight he started with Demian probably didn't help matters, but at least they were leaving soon enough that Hiccup wouldn't have to suffer the unsettling scrutiny of the smith. Things would also speed along if Hiccup could get a full night's rest. Toothless turned his eyes on his human, his superior eyesight catching details through darkness and space, even with only the squares of inside called windows granting him true vision. The boy sat at a table with that large fellow, half down, looking irritated with the man, but the tension in his shoulders had lessened since earlier that day. Toothless saw some of the same symptoms in the boy as he felt himself, and he knew Hiccup suffered from this grounded life as well. It was winding them both up, affecting their minds, their judgment, their concentration. They needed the air and their freedom and each other. Too many others had interfered with their time and activity. Toothless's ear played shut to attention when he saw Doris approach Hiccup from behind. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and Hiccup turned. Toothless could see Hiccup's grip on his tankard in a short spasm as he looked into the woman's face. Doris said something, but the din leaking from the walls of the tavern screened the words. Toothless didn't think most of them were Norse anyhow. Doris bent down, the look on her face tender, and she grabbed Hiccup's forearm, coaxing him from his seat. "Come on, Hiccup, do it for you." Perhaps fueled by Toothless's silent encouragement, this time Hiccup allowed Doris to pull him away from the drink and the laughing men. Toothless saw Hiccup gesture something to the Vikings that had them laughing even more, something he suspected meant unkindness, before Doris and Hiccup disappeared from view. A beat later, and the tavern door opened, releasing heat and singing and laughter into the night before Hiccup shut it once more behind him. Doris continued to lead Hiccup down the street, back to the palace. Hiccup swayed a couple times, but otherwise kept signs of inebriation from sight. Toothless could make out the color on the boy's cheeks that spread down his neck and beneath his tunic. This usually symbolized embarrassment, but Toothless didn't think an embarrassed Hiccup would stop Doris 3 buildings down into their journey and kiss her against the clay wall, much as she had done to him days before. Toothless turned away from the enthusiastic pair and slunk into the shadows. He had much to learn about human mating rights, but he'd rather hear about them than bear witness. Toothless held a high expectation for the satiation of Hiccup's yen, a hope which soon dipped into disappointment after a short walk by the boy's side. Hiccup made his way to the hippodrome for a morning spa with Harold, unhurried and pensive. He hardly acknowledged Toothless when the dragon hopped down from a high perch, scaring some pedestrians into screams that may have never met the boy's ears for all his reaction. Toothless didn't say anything for the duration of the walk. He stared at his human's profile, trying to place the expression on the young man's face. He seemed so subdued. Shouldn't he be happy, relieved? He appeared relaxed, at least, which was more than Toothless could say for himself. The hippodrome stood into sight when Hiccup finally broke the silence.
"Toothless,
he exhaled heavily, shaking his head.
I shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that?"
It sounded as if Hiccup only meant to talk to himself, but Toothless responded anyway. "You don't feel better?" Hiccup grimaced, glancing down at the dragon and then up ahead again.
"I do feel better, but at the same time, I don't. I don't know. I guess I'm disappointed in myself. I mean, she's a prostitute, courtesan, whatever. It's still kind of low of me, right?"
Hiccup couldn't seriously expect Toothless to answer that. He didn't understand a single thing about human mating rights, let alone their standards. Slowly, Toothless struggled to piece together some kind of consolation. "Humans seem to only engage in rutting during mating, and if the desire to rut is there, but no need for offspring, then the partner shouldn't matter too much, should it?" A small, strained smile found its way onto Hiccup's face. It was a start.
"That's simplifying it?"
"I think you just like complicating things," Toothless went on. "You did it again this morning, so it must have been an enjoyable activity." Hiccup sucked in a sharp breath.
"Wait, how do you know that?"
he hissed, his eyes bulging. Going with the loss of color in the freckled cheeks, Toothless got the impression Hiccup already suspected the answer. They entered the outer wall of the hippodrome, and the dragon responded truthfully, refusing to feel ashamed. "I wanted to see if you were done yet, and you weren't."
You watched?"
The boy made an odd yelping sound at the end of the sentence, like a hatchling that had its tail trodden on. Toothless at least had the decency to lower his ear plates in a wince. I didn't stay long. I was curious.
Oh, gods,
Hiccup moaned, rubbing a hand over his face. I just don't understand why it's all about the rutting. The human looked faint, pale, even as they re-emerged into the sunlight.
Shut up. Just shut up for a moment.
Is it that gratifying?
Toothless, please.
Hiccup stopped walking steps into the drome as the perfect distraction to Toothless's embarrassing prodding materialized before him. It was not Harold who greeted him this morning, but Halfdan, swinging his ramphaya. And Halfdan was smiling. Halfdan would not stop smiling. The hairs on Hiccup's neck rose. He could feel his hackles rise for reasons he couldn't place, and his body tensed as he continued his journey to the center of the arena.
Where's Harold?
Hiccup asked by way of saying good morning.
Taking a day off?
Halfdan shrugged, that galling smile still present.
Thought I'd take over for the day.
Did you?
Hiccup muttered, sparing a glance where Toothless had climbed up the stands.
Aye,
Halfdan grinned.
Dora said you have a lot of potential.
Hiccup, who had been about to take his saber from his belt, stiffened.
What?
He spoke slowly, a dangerous edge in his voice, and, if possible, Halfdan's smile grew wider.
Ran into her just before I came here. Said you were a fast learner.
Hiccup's face heated. His blood ran cold.
She told you that, did she?
He knew it was a bad idea. He knew it. Halfdan laughed, planting the head of his axe in the dirt and leaning on its handle like a stand. The wood lining cried in protest to the weight.
Might have heckled her a bit. I don't be like that now. It's all in good
Hiccup wasn't sure how it happened. One moment he was focusing on the tremble of his arms, and the next he was standing over Halfdan, the man flat-backed on the ground, smile absent, a hand cupping his mouth instead where Hiccup had struck him.
Oi!
Halfdan hissed. He sat up quickly, looking at the dabbles of blood on his fingers where his own tooth cut his lip.
What the bleeding hell was that about?
Hiccup's fist was still clenched, but the initial indignation-fueled rage had released with the punch. He wouldn't apologize. It was far too satisfying to forcibly take a smile from someone like Halfdan's face. He did, however, hold out a hand.
You're the biggest troll I've ever met,
he informed the man. When Halfdan made no motion to accept the offer to stand, Hiccup added,
Consider that payment for shooting Toothless out of the sky.
Thank you, Hiccup heard the dragon call across the stadium. His lips quirked into a smile, one that spurred the Viking into gripping the outstretched hand. Hiccup gave a slight grunt as he helped the man to his feet.
All right, then,
Halfdan conceded, once fully upright. He wiped the collected dust from his trousers.
I suppose that evens things out a bit. I'll admit to not seeing that coming.
Hiccup punched the other half of Halfdan's mouth as the man's eyes were lowered to examine the blood wiped from his lip. Halfdan stumbled badly and only just managed to keep his feet under him. He didn't investigate the damage this time. He didn't react to any pain he may have felt. He only stared at Hiccup as though seeing someone else entirely.
What the fucking hell are you playing at?
All the friendly composure that Halfdan managed to throw around every day expunged from his body. Hiccup smiled, experiencing a dark pleasure in trampling Halfdan's blithe spirits.
That was for hitting me.
That was months ago,
Halfdan exclaimed, aghast.
Still happened.
You want to fight, do you?
Halfdan gripped his ramphaya, and for the first time Hiccup beheld the creature enemies of the Varinja faced, the snarling wild barbarians of legend.
I'll give you a fight.
Hiccup welcomed the change in demeanor and readied his sword. Halfdan charged.
I still owe you one more for forcing a prostitute on me,
Hiccup tossed in, trotting backwards out of swinging range. Unlike Harold, Halfdan couldn't quite control his momentum as well, probably too used to meeting opponents head-on, and it took him an instant longer to recover from the miss. An instant in battle could mean life or death.
Will you stop calling her that?
Halfdan swung the axe so hard it impacted the dirt with a resounding thud. Hiccup would have pressed his advantage if Halfdan didn't have, and demonstrate, the ability to rip the weapon from such deep embedment with seemingly no effort.
She's a good lass, a courtesan.
Who cares if she lives in the palace?
Hiccup blocked the side swing and found his weight shoved a great distance to the side, his feet leaving skid marks in the upended dirt. He grunted under the strain of the blow.
It's still just a job to her.
You know nothing about her,
Halfdan went on, frustration remaining on his face as Hiccup became harder and harder to hit. Why didn't Harold warn him about this kid? It was like trying to hit a gnat with a hammer.
She was married as a girl to some council member thrice her age.
Hiccup hopped away from another downswing, only commenting with an ew. Halfdan puffed from the wasted exertion he put into each strike, and he slowed in his ferocity.
He wanted heirs, and she was such a pretty thing.
As Halfdan led up, Hiccup eased his stance as well.
Couldn't give him any, so he got rid of her and got himself a new wife.
Hiccup narrowed his eyes.
How do you just get rid of your wife? For not having kids?
Divorce was rare enough with Vikings, but from all he knew of the South, it was all but unheard of. Halfdan shrugged, his own moment of rage subsiding as he took his moment of dialogue to catch his breath.
An official that high up, they can pretty much do as they please if they're sneaky enough about it. He had far more credence than her, spread enough rumors to disgrace her, and was granted an annulment. She had nothing to her name, faced a lot of strife for it, but she was such a sweet lass that Halfdan and Bolly convinced the Empress to let her live as a courtesan. She adjusted to life well enough.
All because she couldn't give him kids?
Hiccup wondered aloud. Something irked him to no end about such a fate. Doris couldn't help the way she was born. Vikings would adopt or find a surrogate mother. Legitimacy didn't have to come through blood, unlike with the South. To live in ridicule simply because she didn't live up to the standards of a backward society, he bit his lip. She slept with men to stay in the palace. She slept with him because, well, he wasn't rightly sure anymore. Possibly because Halfdan paid her in misguided kindness, possibly because Hiccup was the rider, though neither explained why she gave so much consideration to his burns. She paid special attention to the scar on his back that morning when the sunlight brought it to visibility, kissing its length and murmuring words in Greek he could only guess at. That didn't seem like things a prostitute would do, to show care towards someone's blemishes. It seemed like something a lover would do.
Aye,
Halfdan agreed solemnly, breaking Hiccup from his thoughts.
More barren than an ale barrel on jaw.
Vexation rattled Hiccup, and so he punched Halfdan in the face for a third time that morning.
What the?
That was for clearly skipping Laugadar.
Get over here.
Look, I just can't get them hard enough.
Sweat poured down the sides of Hiccup's face, stinging his eyes with salt and smudged ash. His arms ached from working the bellows over and over and over again. Toothless provided Hiccup with more and more scales over the next day, but no matter how much he stoked the fire, the flame would not affect them. Shingling them proved just as fruitless, as any time it did manage to pierce them, no amount of precision would keep the entire scale from cracking. They either shattered or proved indestructible. They were blacksmith nightmare material.
I can't say I'm surprised.
Toothless yawned. He scratched his ear plate with his back paw. Even when separated from my body, they're flame retardant.
I was so sure an extension of time would do it,
Hiccup mumbled, staring at the pile of fire-immune scales. Just reweigh it, the dragon ordered. Hiccup looked pained.
Can't we just... I don't know. There's nothing else we can try?
Hiccup didn't want to give up on this. He hated giving up in the midst of creation. He reached for the bellow one more time.
Maybe if we just keep at it, for...
Will you leave that alone? Toothless snapped, and he shot a plasma bolt at the hearth, sending Hiccup leaping back with a loud cry. I'm tired of waiting. I can't wait any more. I need to fly.
What is wrong with...
Hiccup cut his own words off so abruptly that it looked as if he physically swallowed the rest of them. Sorrow read all over his face as he regarded his dragon. He would not finish the statement. Not when he knew the answer clear as day.
You're right,
he said softly.
You're right, I'm so sorry. You're right. I'm wasting time. This was pointless, and I've just kept you, both of us, here.
Hiccup's apology, his acknowledgement of the problem without Toothless having to shove it in his face, helped the dragon calm down. He sat back on his tail and nudged the box of excess materials over to Hiccup. Let's just get back in the air, shall we? Hiccup grinned.
Yeah, you're right. But first I need to clean up a few things from a certain explosion before Demian gets here.
If you finish the tail fin, then we can leave without cleaning up, and he won't be able to do a thing about it.
Toothless?
What? Hiccup didn't answer, and Toothless followed the human's gaze to the hearth, where the fire had darkened into a deep brown color that he had never seen a flame burn with, not in all his years of encountering dragons. However, it was not the fire that captured Hiccup's attention.
It was the scales within that unique brown flame, scales that had jellified. A blue-black mess smoldered over the heated rocks within the fire, the very edges dribbling onto hissing stones and inky globs.
"Your fire,"
Hiccup breathed. He began hitting Toothless's shoulder with the back of his hand, just in case the dragon wasn't paying attention. Toothless shook his head, unwilling to let Hiccup finish the statement.
"No, that makes no sense. My scales can withstand dragon fire. Most dragons can."
Hiccup's face contorted with thought.
"If my fire couldn't do it, and your fire couldn't do it, then maybe—"
He turned his head ever so slowly to meet Toothless's matching eyes, and the dragon caught on immediately.
"Human and dragon fire can?"
The smile on Hiccup's face could only be called maniacal. For once, Toothless welcomed it.
"We're getting out of here soon, buddy."
"I guess if we're doing it in style, I can wait one more day."
"That's all I ask."
They spent the entire day in the forge. Hiccup created molds, experimented in mixing Toothless's blue flame with different temperatures of human fire until he discovered the perfect consistency to shape the scales. And when Demian tried to kick them out, they took the forge by force, with Toothless showing him the true fury of a dragon. The tail fin would not match Toothless's real one in terms of texture. It would have a smooth but protective casing. After much trial and error, Hiccup managed to successfully spread it thin to maintain a component of elasticity, but once solidified, it would harden back into its former consistency. The scales were slow to cool and, to be safe, Hiccup decided to let the finished project sit out the night. The morning would begin with healing winds. Hiccup lay in bed now, sprawled out with one leg free of the blankets and a hand resting by Toothless's knee. The dragon looked at his human, at the youth that resurfaced when such a deep unawareness took hold, and a heavy appreciation for having such a creature in his life cocooned his heart. He lost so much, and he gained so much, simply because this raw-boned human had tail-prodded his way into his life. He found the odds of such a fate to be in his favor. Tailfin or no tailfin, this was who he wanted by his side. All of this, from the square teeth to the uneven fur, this was his other half. Toothless gave a soft lick to Hiccup's cheek. The boy had the gall to scowl even when dreaming, and he left the bed. He made no effort to keep quiet, and his tail thumped the ground as it dragged behind him. Hiccup wouldn't be asleep for much longer. Toothless exited the room and paused to look at the woman pressed against the wall at the door's edge. She sucked in her breath at the pair of feline-like eyes pinning her and her intentions, but she stood her ground and held Toothless's gaze in that moment, unmoving, unbreathing, waiting for something, a signal, a gesture. After a time of unending silence, Toothless gave her a deliberate nod, acknowledgement, greeting, permission. The human didn't know. She couldn't understand the dragon as Hiccup could, but she took it as a yes in every sense of the word, and without lingering in the presence of the great dragon, or trying to touch him or spend any inordinate amount of time admiring the shine of his scales in the window-filtered moonlight, Doris entered Hiccup's bedroom without a second thought. Toothless continued on his trek to escape the palace, ready to make the most of his last night of being grounded.